Man sells counterfeit medicine to little old lady unknowingly to a police officer in disguise. Margaret Johnson adjusted the scarf on her head and walked into the pharmacy with slow steps, just like any 70-year-old woman would on a hot afternoon in Denver. What the pharmacist behind the counter didn't know was that she had spent the last 6 months investigating reports of adulterated medicines in the area. "Good afternoon, son. I need this blood pressure medicine," she said, handing over a forged prescription she had prepared specifically for this moment. Michael Peterson took the paper and glanced at it quickly. At 42, he had worked at that pharmacy for 3 years and knew exactly what he was about to do. He went to the shelf and grabbed a bottle that looked identical to the original medication but cost $40 less to produce. "That'll be $60, ma'am," he said, placing the bottle on the counter with a forced smile. Margaret watched his every move with trained attention. After decades working as an investigator, she had learned to read people like open books. His nervousness, the way he avoided eye contact, his hurry to complete the sale, it all confirmed her suspicions. "Is this medicine really good, son?" she asked, picking up the bottle and pretending to examine the label with difficulty. "Of course, ma'am. It's top quality," Michael replied, but his voice trembled slightly. Margaret noticed how he was sweating despite the air conditioning running. She had seen this same reaction dozens of times in her career, the fear of being caught, the guilt eating away inside. "You know, son, I've been taking this medicine for 15 years. My late husband took it too," she said, her voice turning more serious. "Are you sure this is the right medication?" Michael swallowed hard. There was something about the way the old woman was looking at him that made him uneasy. She no longer seemed like the harmless little lady who had walked in minutes earlier. "Yes, ma'am, you can trust me," he insisted, but his hands shook as he prepared her change. That's when Margaret decided to act. With a quick, precise movement, she grabbed Michael's wrist with a strength that completely startled him. With her other hand, she opened her purse and pulled out a black leather badge holder. "Margaret Johnson, retired investigator working in cooperation with the Health Protection Agency," she said, flashing her official credentials. Michael's face drained of color. The medicine bottle slipped from his hands and rolled across the counter, the sound echoing in the tense silence that had fallen over the pharmacy. I didn't," he stammered, trying to pull away, but Margaret kept a firm grip on his wrist. "You were about to sell me counterfeit medicine, weren't you?" she asked, her calm voice contrasting with the storm brewing in Michael's eyes. The pharmacist looked around desperately, as if searching for an exit that didn't exist. The pharmacy, which moments ago had felt safe and familiar, had now become a trap. "Ma'am, please, I can explain," he murmured, finally finding his voice. "Then explain," Margaret said, releasing his wrist but keeping her badge in plain sight. "And don't try lying to me. I've seen plenty in my time." Michael took a deep breath, trying to gather his thoughts. His mind raced in every direction, searching for a way out of this without completely ruining his life. "You don't understand. I didn't want to do this," he began, his voice barely above a whisper. "Then why did you?" Margaret asked, crossing her arms and positioning herself to block any escape attempt. By now, other customers in the pharmacy were starting to notice something was happening. A woman holding a child approached the counter to pay for her medication, but stopped when she sensed the tension in the air. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, take a moment to like the video and, most importantly, subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now, back to the story. "My daughter," Michael said, his words coming out strained. "My 8-year-old daughter has a rare illness. The treatments cost over $15,000 a month." Margaret felt a tightness in her chest. Throughout her career, she had learned that people rarely did bad things simply out of malice. There was always a story behind it, a pain that pushed ordinary people into desperate decisions. "And you thought selling counterfeit drugs was the solution?" she asked, though her voice had lost some of its initial harshness. "I didn't know what else to do." Michael collapsed against the counter. "The banks won't give me any more loans. I've sold everything I own. Emily Rose needs this medicine or she'll... He couldn't finish the sentence. Tears began streaming down his face, and Margaret felt her professional resolve waver for the first time in decades. "Where is your daughter now?" she asked, her voice softer. "In the hospital. She has to be admitted 3 times a week for treatment," Michael replied, wiping his eyes with the back of his hand. Margaret fell silent for a moment, processing the information. She had dedicated her retirement to fighting exactly this kind of crime because she knew how much counterfeit drugs could harm innocent people. But now, faced with this man's raw pain, the situation had become far more complicated. "How long have you been doing this?" she asked. 2 months, he admitted. "Only for a few specific medications. Nothing that could really hurt anyone, I swear." "Michael," Margaret said, using his name for the first time, "you don't understand. Every counterfeit drug can hurt someone. It can even kill." I know, he repeated, running his hands through his hair. "But I couldn't let my daughter suffer. What would you do in my place?" The question hit Margaret like a punch to the gut. She thought of her own granddaughter, Sophie, who lived in Chicago with her daughter. What would she do if the girl was sick and she couldn't afford the treatment? "Who's behind this?" she asked, shifting tactics. "Because I know you're not acting alone." Michael hesitated. He glanced around, checking if anyone else was listening. The woman with the child had moved away, sensing this wasn't a normal situation. "I can't say," he murmured. "Michael, you're in serious trouble. Selling counterfeit drugs is a major crime. If you cooperate with me, maybe I can help you and your daughter," Margaret said, stepping closer to the counter. "How?" he asked, a flicker of hope in his eyes. "First, tell me who's supplying these counterfeit drugs," she said. "Then we'll see what we can do." Michael looked toward the pharmacy door, as if expecting someone to walk in at any moment. His hands trembled visibly as he weighed his options. "It's the pharmacy owner," he finally said. "Dr. Richard Wilson. He runs a chain of 5 pharmacies in the metro area." Margaret mentally noted the name. During her preliminary investigation, it had come up several times, but always indirectly. "Does he force you to sell the counterfeit drugs?" she asked. "Not exactly," Michael replied. "He offers extra commission for those who sell more. When I started needing urgent money for Emily Rose, he showed me how I could earn more." "And how exactly does it work?" Margaret pressed. Michael looked at the door once more before answering. "The counterfeit medications arrive in separate boxes, always on Wednesdays. They're almost identical to the real ones but cost much less to produce. The difference goes partly to Dr. Richard and partly to us, the employees." "How many employees are involved in this?" asked Margaret. "All of them, I think," said Michael. "At least in the pharmacies where I've worked before. It's like it's part of the job." Margaret felt a chill. If this were true, it meant hundreds, maybe thousands of people were being deceived every day, buying medications that didn't work or could even be harmful. "Michael, I need you to help me stop this," she said, her voice firm again. "I can't," he replied, shaking his head. "If Dr. Richard finds out I talk to anyone, he'll fire me. And without this job, I won't even be able to afford the basics for Emily." "What if I guarantee you won't lose your job?" asked Margaret. "How can you guarantee that?" Michael asked skeptically. "Because I have more experience than you think," she replied. "And because I know how to handle people like Dr. Richard." At that moment, the pharmacy door opened, and a well-dressed man walked in. Michael instantly turned pale. "Dr. Richard," he murmured. The man who had just entered was around 50, wearing an expensive suit and walking with the confidence of someone used to being in control. He stopped abruptly when he noticed the tension at the counter. "Michael, is everything all right here?" he asked, his eyes shifting between the pharmacist and Margaret. "Everything's fine, doctor," Michael answered quickly, trying to sound normal. Richard approached the counter, studying Margaret with curiosity. She, in turn, kept a neutral expression, as if she were just an ordinary customer. "Do you need anything?" Richard asked, forcing a smile. "I've already been helped, thank you," Margaret replied, picking up her purse. "Great," Richard said, but continued watching her closely. Margaret realized she needed to leave before the situation got more complicated. She glanced at Michael one last time, trying to send a silent message. "Michael, thank you for your help," she said, emphasizing the words so only he would understand the double meaning. "You're welcome, ma'am," he replied, catching her drift. Margaret left the pharmacy but didn't go home. Instead, she positioned herself in a coffee shop across the street where she could watch the pharmacy entrance unseen. For the next 15 minutes, she saw Richard talking intensely with Michael, Even from a distance, it was clear the pharmacist was being pressured. Several times, he pointed in the direction Margaret had gone, likely answering questions about her. When Richard finally left the pharmacy, Margaret waited a few more minutes before going back. She needed to talk to Michael again, but this time, more carefully. "Michael," she said, stepping quickly inside, "we need to talk." "Ma'am, please just go," he said, glancing nervously at the street. "Dr. Richard asked a lot of questions about you. He's suspicious." "That's exactly why I need your help," Margaret insisted. "If he's suspicious, it means we don't have much time." "Time for what?" Michael asked. "To gather enough evidence to stop this before more people get hurt," she replied. Michael fell silent, clearly torn between fear and guilt. "What about my daughter?" he finally asked. "We'll find a way to help her too," Margaret promised. "But first, we need to stop this counterfeit medication ring." At that moment, an elderly woman walked into the pharmacy. Margaret recognized the type of customer who usually fell victim to scams. She was alone, seemed confused by the array of medication options, and clearly didn't have much money. "Good afternoon," the woman said. "I need medicine for arthritis. The doctor said any kind will do, as long as it's cheap." Margaret saw Michael hesitate. He glanced at her, then at the customer, and finally at the shelves where both genuine and counterfeit medications were stocked. "Michael," Margaret murmured, too quietly for the customer to hear. "Do the right thing." He took a deep breath and walked to the shelf with the original medications. "This one is the best for what you need," he said, picking up a bottle of the real medicine. "And it's on sale today." The elderly woman smiled, thanked him, and paid for the medication. After she left, Michael turned to Margaret. "There, I'm unemployed now," he said bitterly. "Not necessarily," Margaret replied. "If we handle this right, you could be seen as someone who helped solve the problem, not as part of it." "How?" Michael asked. "Let me think of a plan," Margaret said. "Where do you live?" "Why?" he asked, suspicious. "Because we need to meet somewhere safe to talk properly, and because I want to meet your daughter," she answered. Michael hesitated for a moment, but finally wrote his address on a piece of paper. "Emily is at the hospital today," he said, "but she'll be home tomorrow." "Then we'll meet tomorrow night," Margaret said. "And Michael, don't tell anyone about our conversation. Not your wife, not anyone." "I'm not married," he said. "I've been taking care of Emily alone since her mother left us 2 years ago." Margaret felt another pang in her chest. Michael's situation was becoming more complex and heartbreaking by the minute. "See you tomorrow, then," she said, leaving the pharmacy with more questions than answers. That night, Margaret couldn't sleep. She spent hours reviewing everything she knew about the case and planning her next steps. Her experience told her she needed to act fast, but her compassion for Michael and his daughter made her want to find a solution that wouldn't ruin their lives. The next morning, she decided to dig deeper into Richard Wilson's background. Using her old contacts, she discovered that he did indeed own a chain of pharmacies, but also had a history of run-ins with regulators. 3 years earlier, one of his pharmacies had been fined for selling expired medication. 2 years before that, another had been temporarily shut down for inventory irregularities. But he always managed to resolve the issues by paying fines and making deals. The pattern was clear. Richard Wilson was a businessman who put profit above customer safety, but knew how to operate within legal limits to avoid serious consequences. Margaret also found something interesting. Richard had a son who had graduated from medical school 2 years earlier, but hadn't secured a residency. The young man had opened a private clinic that wasn't doing well financially. It was possible the pressure to keep the family businesses afloat was pushing Richard to take bigger risks. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, don't forget to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now back to the story. When evening came, Margaret headed to the address Michael had given her. It was a small apartment in a working-class neighborhood of Denver, but it was clean and well kept. Michael opened the door and greeted her with a shy smile. "Come in, please," he said. The apartment was simple but cozy. There were children's drawings stuck on the refrigerator and toys neatly arranged in a corner of the living room. It was clearly the home of someone who, despite financial struggles, worked hard to create a happy environment for their daughter. "Where's Emily Rose?" asked Margaret. "Sleeping," replied Michael. "The treatment leaves her exhausted." "May I see her?" Margaret requested. Michael hesitated, but eventually agreed. He led her to a small bedroom where an 8-year-old girl slept peacefully. Even in the dim light, it was clear how pale and fragile she looked. Margaret felt a lump in her throat. The girl reminded her of her own granddaughter when she was little, and she could perfectly understand Michael's desperation. "She's beautiful," Margaret murmured. "She's all I have in this world," Michael said, his voice thick with emotion. They returned to the living room and sat at the kitchen table. "Michael, I need you to tell me everything about Dr. Richard's scheme," Margaret said. "And I mean everything." Michael poured coffee for both of them and began to talk. Over the next hour, he revealed details that made Margaret realize the situation was far worse than she had imagined. The counterfeit drugs didn't just come from local suppliers. There was a network spanning multiple states, with underground labs producing adulterated versions of expensive medications. Richard wasn't just a buyer of these drugs, he was one of the organizers. His chain of pharmacies served as a distribution hub for smaller establishments. "How did you find all this out?" Margaret asked. "By accident," Michael replied. "One night I forgot my wallet at the pharmacy and went back to get it. There was a meeting in Dr. Richard's office. I overheard parts of the conversation." "What kind of conversation?" Margaret pressed. "They were talking about expanding to other cities. Richard said he had contacts in Omaha, Rochester, and even Miami," Michael answered. Margaret made a few mental notes. If this was true, they were dealing with something much bigger than a simple local scheme. "Michael, I'll be straight with you," she said. "What you've told me is evidence of a very serious crime. If this reaches the authorities as it stands, you'll be arrested along with Richard." Michael paled. "But there's a way for you to come out of this as a hero instead of a criminal," Margaret continued. "How?" he asked. "By helping me gather enough evidence to dismantle the entire network," she replied. "If you cooperate with the investigation, you could get immunity, maybe even a reward." "What kind of evidence?" Michael asked. "Documents, recordings, information about suppliers and clients," Margaret said. "Anything that proves how the scheme works." Michael fell silent for a few minutes, clearly weighing the consequences of each decision. "What if Dr. Richard finds out I'm helping you?" he finally asked. "We'll make sure that doesn't happen," Margaret reassured him. "At least not until we have enough evidence." "And my daughter? If I'm arrested, who will take care of her?" Michael asked, his greatest fear surfacing. "Michael, your daughter needs you free and honest, not rich and criminal," Margaret said gently. "And if we do this right, you might even get legal help for her treatment." "How?" he asked. "There are government programs and organizations that assist families in situations like yours," Margaret explained. "The problem is, many people don't know how to access those resources." "Do you know about these programs?" Michael asked, a spark of hope in his eyes. "I know a few, and I have contacts who can help navigate the bureaucracy," Margaret replied. "But first, we need to resolve the pharmacy situation." Michael looked toward his daughter's room and then back at Margaret. "What exactly do you want me to do?" he asked. "For now, just keep working as usual," Margaret said. "But pay attention to everything: delivery schedules, supplier names, suspicious conversations, and if possible, try to record some things." "Record how?" Michael asked. Margaret reached into her purse and pulled out a small digital recorder. "Use this when you can, but be very careful," she said, handing him the device. "And if there's any sign of danger, stop immediately." Michael took the recorder and examined it. It was so small it could easily be hidden in his pocket. "And if I get the evidence, what happens next?" "We present everything to the proper authorities," Margaret replied, "and you testify as a cooperating witness, not as a criminal." "Are you sure this will work?" Michael asked. "I have 30 years of experience in these kinds of situations," Margaret answered, "and I've seen people in worse positions find redemption." Michael took a deep breath, making his decision. "All right," he said. "I'll help you." "Good," Margaret said, standing up. "But remember, Absolute discretion. Your life and Emily's may depend on it. After Margaret left, Michael stayed up late, staring at the recorder and thinking about what he'd just agreed to do. For the first time in months, he felt something he'd forgotten existed: hope. The next morning, Michael arrived at work with a completely different perspective. Instead of just trying to survive another day, he had a mission. His first few hours were normal, helping customers and organizing medications. But around 10 o'clock, he noticed unusual movement in Richard's office. Two men he'd never seen before were talking to the pharmacy owner. One carried a metal briefcase, and both seemed to be discussing something important. Michael discreetly turned on the recorder and positioned himself closer to the office, pretending to organize shelves. "Next delivery has to be on Thursday," he heard one of the men say. "Isn't that too soon?" Richard's voice replied. "The folks in Miami are pushing for it. They need the supplies by the weekend," the other man said. Michael tried to listen more, but other customers entered the pharmacy, forcing him to step away to assist them. Throughout the rest of the day, he managed to catch fragments of other conversations. Slowly, a pattern emerged. There were regular deliveries of supplies coming from Chicago and going to Miami, passing through Denver. By evening, Michael was eager to meet Margaret again. They had arranged to meet in a park near the hospital where Emily was receiving treatment. "How was your first day?" Margaret asked as they sat on a park bench. "I got some things," Michael replied, handing her the recorder. Margaret connected the device to a small speaker, and they listened to the recordings together. Even with the imperfect quality, key parts of the conversations were clear. "This is very good," Margaret said. "It confirms there's an interstate network involved." "What do we do now?" Michael asked. "Keep gathering information," Margaret answered, "and try to learn more details about these deliveries." "You mentioned knowing programs that could help with Emily's treatment," Michael reminded her. "Yes," Margaret replied. "In fact, I've already made some calls. There's a state government program that covers treatments for rare diseases. The problem is the bureaucracy." "What kind of bureaucracy?" Michael asked. "Documents, medical evaluations, proof of income," Margaret explained. "Things that could take months to process." "Months that Emily Rose doesn't have," said Michael, disheartened. "That's why I'm trying to speed things up," said Margaret. "I have a friend who works at the Department of Health. She's seeing what she can do." "Really?" asked Michael, his eyes filling with tears. "Really," confirmed Margaret. "But in the meantime, we need to continue our investigation." Over the next few days, Michael became an unlikely spy. He learned to use the recorder discreetly, to memorize important information, and to notice patterns that had previously gone unnoticed. Gradually, a clearer picture began to emerge. Richard wasn't just a buyer of counterfeit drugs. He was one of the coordinators of a sophisticated operation involving production, distribution, and large-scale sales. The operation worked like this. Underground labs in Chicago produced counterfeit versions of expensive medications. These products were transported to Denver in trucks that also carried legitimate drugs, masking the illegal operation. In Denver, Richard received the goods and distributed them to his network of pharmacies, as well as to other establishments in smaller towns across Colorado. Some of the counterfeit drugs continued on to Miami, where another distribution network spread them to pharmacies in the metropolitan area. The profits were enormous. The counterfeit drugs cost about 30% of the price of the originals to produce, but were sold for 80% of the normal price, leaving a profit margin of over 400%. Michael uncovered all of this over 2 weeks of discreet investigation. But on the 15th day, something changed. Richard started watching him more closely. Several times, Michael caught his boss eyeing him suspiciously, and important conversations abruptly stopped when he approached. "I think he's getting suspicious," Michael told Margaret during one of their nightly meetings. "Why?" asked Margaret. "He's been asking a lot of questions about my financial situation. Wants to know if I've managed to resolve the issues with Emily Rose's treatment," explained Michael. "And what did you say?" asked Margaret. "That I'm still desperate for money," said Michael. "I thought it'd be suspicious if I said otherwise." "Good thinking," agreed Margaret, "but we'll have to speed up our investigation." "Why?" asked Michael. "Because if he's suspicious, he'll soon take steps to protect himself," explained Margaret, "and that might include getting rid of you." A chill of fear ran down Michael's spine. "What do you mean by getting rid of?" he asked. "Firing you, moving the operation elsewhere, or maybe even worse," replied Margaret. "People dealing with this kind of money sometimes take drastic measures." "So what now?" asked Michael, growing more nervous. "Now we force the situation," said Margaret. "I need you to do something risky." "What?" asked Michael. "I need you to convince Richard to let you sit in on one of the important meetings," said Margaret. "How am I supposed to do that?" asked Michael. "Tell him your daughter's condition is worsening and you need a lot more money urgently," explained Margaret. "Say you're willing to do anything." "And if he doesn't believe me?" asked Michael. "He will," said Margaret, "because it's true. Emily Rose really does need more medical care." Michael was surprised. "How do you know that?" he asked. "Because I spoke with the hospital's medical team," replied Margaret. "They said her condition is getting more complicated and she'll need more intensive treatments." "Why didn't you tell me this before?" asked Michael, alarmed. "Because I didn't want to worry you even more," replied Margaret. "But there's good news too." "What?" asked Michael. "My friend at the Department of Health managed to speed up the healthcare assistance program process," said Margaret. "If everything goes well, Emily Rose could start receiving free treatment in 2 weeks." Michael was speechless for a moment, torn between relief and worry. 2 weeks, he murmured. "Will she make it?" "She will," Margaret said firmly. "But for that, we need to finish our investigation quickly and make sure you don't lose your job before the program takes effect." "All right," said Michael. "I'll do as you say." The next day, Michael arrived at work visibly worn out. It wasn't hard to pretend. He was genuinely worried about his daughter's health. During lunch, he sought out Richard in his office. "Dr. Wilson, can I speak with you?" he asked. "Of course, Michael. Have a seat," said Richard, gesturing to the chair in front of his desk. "It's about my financial situation," Michael began. "Things are getting even worse." "How so?" asked Richard, feigning concern. "Emily Rose needs more expensive treatments. The doctors said without them she could—" Michael couldn't finish the sentence, but he didn't need to fake the emotion. "How much do you need?" asked Richard. "Far more than I earn here," Michael replied. "Doctor, I know you have other business dealings. I'm willing to do anything to help my daughter." Richard studied Michael for a few seconds, clearly weighing whether to trust him. "Michael, what you're implying is very serious," he finally said. "I know," Michael answered, "and I mean it." "You understand that once you enter this kind of work, there's no going back?" Richard asked. "I understand," Michael said, trying to keep his voice steady. Richard stood and walked to the window, looking out at the street as he thought. "There's a meeting tomorrow night," he finally said. "If you really want in, you can come. But after that, you'll be committed like the rest of us." "Where and what time?" Michael asked. "Right here, after closing. 9 o'clock, Richard replied. "And Michael, I don't need to tell you this stays between us, right?" "Of course, Doctor," Michael answered. When Michael told Margaret about the meeting, she was both excited and worried. "This is exactly what we needed," she said, "but it's also very dangerous." "How do we proceed?" Michael asked. "You'll attend the meeting with the recorder," Margaret said. "But this time, I'll be nearby to ensure your safety." "Nearby how?" Michael asked. "Michael, I'll be on the street watching the pharmacy," Margaret explained. "If anything goes wrong, I can call for help immediately." "What if they find the recorder?" Michael asked. "That's why we're using this one," Margaret said, showing him an even smaller recorder than the first. "It sticks to your skin and is practically undetectable." On the night of the meeting, Michael was nervous but determined. He knew this was likely his only chance to get the evidence Margaret needed. At exactly 9 o'clock, he knocked on the pharmacy's back door. Richard opened it himself. "Come in, Michael," he said. "The others are already here." In the pharmacy's office, 3 men Michael didn't know were seated around a table. Documents were scattered about, and an open briefcase with visible cash sat nearby. "Everyone, this is Michael, the one I mentioned," Richard said. "He's in a tough spot and wants to join us." The 3 men studied Michael carefully. One of them, who seemed to be the leader, stood and approached. "What's your exact situation?" the man asked. Michael told them about his daughter's illness, trying to sound desperate without overdoing it. "And are you willing to take risks to make money?" another man asked. "I am," Michael replied. "What kind of risks do you think we're talking about?" the leader asked. Michael hesitated, unsure how to answer. "Look, Michael," Richard said, stepping in. "These gentlemen oversee an operation that spans multiple states. If you join, you'll make much more money, but you'll also take on much bigger responsibilities." "What kind of responsibilities?" Michael asked. "Managing special inventories, coordinating deliveries, keeping absolute secrecy," one of the men explained. "And if something goes wrong, we're all in the same boat." "I understand," Michael said. Over the next hour, the men explained details of the operation that confirmed everything Michael and Margaret already suspected. But they also revealed new and alarming information. The network wasn't limited to medications. They also counterfeited medical equipment, lab tests, and even healthcare professionals' documents. Michael's recorder captured everything: names, locations, amounts, transport methods, and delivery schedules. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, take a moment to like the video and especially subscribe to the channel. It helps us a lot as we're just starting out. Now, back to the story. "Michael, you'll start next week," the leader said at the end of the meeting. "Richard will explain the details tomorrow." "Thank you for the opportunity," Michael said, trying to sound grateful. When the meeting ended and Michael left the pharmacy, Margaret was waiting for him on the corner. "How did it go?" she asked anxiously. "I got everything," Michael replied, handing her the recorder. "But I'm more and more terrified by the scale of this operation." They got into Margaret's car, where she connected the recorder to a more sophisticated device. "My God," she murmured as she listened to the recordings. "This is much bigger than I imagined." "What do we do now?" Michael asked. "Now, we go to the authorities," Margaret answered. "We have enough evidence to dismantle the entire operation." "What about my daughter?" Michael asked. "It's already taken care of," Margaret said. "My friend got Emily approved for the emergency program. She can start free treatment on Monday." Michael was moved. "How can I ever thank you?" he asked. "You already have," Margaret replied, "by helping stop other families from going through what you did." The next morning, Margaret and Michael went to the Special Division for Crimes Against Public Health. The detective who received them was impressed by the amount and quality of the evidence they provided. "This is professional work," the detective said. "Do you have any idea how many lives you may have saved?" "Doctor," Michael said, "I was part of the scheme. Will I be arrested?" "Considering you came forward voluntarily and provided crucial evidence, you'll likely be treated as a cooperating witness," the detective replied. "But you'll need to testify in all the proceedings." "That's fine," Michael said. The operation to arrest Richard and his associates was planned for the next day. Michael would keep working as usual to avoid raising suspicions. But that afternoon, something unexpected happened. Emily came home from school feeling sick. Michael had to leave work in a hurry to take her to the hospital. "Dad, I'm really scared," the girl said as they waited to be seen. "You don't need to be afraid, sweetheart," Michael said, holding her small hand. "Tomorrow, you'll start a new and better treatment." "How?" Emily asked. "A very special lady helped us," Michael explained. "She found a program that will take care of you for free." "Who is she?" asked the girl. "A retired investigator who dedicates her life to helping people like us," replied Michael. At that moment, Margaret arrived at the hospital. Michael had called her, worried about his daughter's condition. "How is she?" asked Margaret. "The doctors said it's a normal episode considering her illness," Michael answered. "But they were happy when they found out she'll be enrolled in the new program." "Can I meet her?" Margaret requested. Michael led her to the room where Emily was resting. "Emily, this is Mrs. Johnson," he said. "She's the special lady I told you about." The girl looked at Margaret with curiosity. "Are you really a detective?" Emily asked. "I was," Margaret replied, smiling. "Now I'm just a grandma who likes to help people." "Do you have grandchildren?" the girl asked. "I have a granddaughter your age in Chicago," Margaret answered. "Her name is Sophie." "Is she sick too?" Emily asked. "No, she's healthy," Margaret said. "But if she were, I'd want someone like me to help you help her." Emily smiled for the first time in days. "Thank you for helping my dad," she said. Margaret felt tears in her eyes. "You're welcome, sweetheart," she replied. "Your father is a very brave man." The next day, the police operation went as planned. Richard and his associates were caught red-handed during a delivery of counterfeit medication. The network was dismantled simultaneously in Chicago, Colorado, and Miami. Over 50 people were arrested, including the organization's leaders. Michael testified in all the trials, providing crucial details that ensured convictions. Richard was sentenced to 12 years in prison. The other leaders received similar sentences. Michael wasn't prosecuted. Instead, he received a letter of recognition from the authorities and a small cash reward. With Margaret's help, he got a job at an honest pharmacy where he's worked for 2 years. Emily made a full recovery. The free treatment she receives through the government program is better than anything Michael could have paid for. The girl is now 10 years old, doing well in school, and dreams of becoming a doctor when she grows up. "To help other kids like me," she always says. Margaret continued her volunteer work, helping other families navigate the bureaucracy of healthcare assistance programs. She and Emily grew very close. The girl calls her Grandma Margaret and spends some weekends at her house. "You know, Michael," Margaret said one of those weekends as they watched Emily play in the yard. "When I started this investigation, I thought I was just doing my job. And now?" Michael asked. "Now I know I was finding a family," she replied with a smile. Michael looked at his daughter, playing happily and healthy, and at Margaret, who had become so much more than an investigator to them. "Mrs. Johnson," he said, "you didn't just save Emily's life. You saved our whole family." "You saved mine too," Margaret answered. "You gave me a purpose I didn't know I was looking for." 3 months later, Emily was officially discharged. The doctors said she was cured, and the chances of relapse were minimal. The family decided to throw a party to celebrate. Margaret helped organize everything, inviting some neighbors and Michael's co-workers. During the party, Emily made a special drawing for Margaret. It showed a woman holding an investigator's badge next to a smiling child. "For Grandma Margaret, who saves families," was written beneath the drawing. Margaret kept the drawing with great care. It was proof that sometimes, from the most difficult situations, the most beautiful friendships can blossom. At the end of the party, when everyone had already left, Michael, Emily, and Margaret sat on the porch watching the sunset. "Dad," said Emily, "do you regret what you did at the pharmacy?" Michael thought for a moment before answering. "I regret selling fake medicine," he said. "That was wrong and could have hurt innocent people." "And the rest?" the girl asked. "Not the rest," Michael replied, "because that's what brought me to Grandma Margaret and taught us there's always a right way to solve problems." "And what's the right way?" Emily asked. "Asking for help," Margaret answered, "and never giving up on doing what's right, even when it seems hardest." Emily smiled and nestled between her father and her adoptive grandma. "I'm glad you found each other," she said. "We are too, sweetheart," Margaret said. "We are too." Years later, when Emily was in high school, she wrote an essay about everyday heroes for a school contest. She wrote about a retired investigator who dedicated her life to protecting other families, and about a father who found the courage to do the right thing even when he was desperate. The essay won first place, and Emily was invited to present it at a special ceremony. Michael and Margaret sat in the audience, proud of the girl they had helped raise together. "Our story began in a pharmacy," Emily said during her speech, "where a desperate man was about to make a mistake that would change his life forever. But it was also where he found someone who showed him there's always a better way to solve our problems. Sometimes heroes don't wear capes. Sometimes they wear cardigans and carry investigator badges. And sometimes they're fathers who find the courage to do what's right, even when it means admitting they were wrong. My family exists today because 2 people decided doing the right thing was more important than doing the easy thing. And that's why, every time I go to a pharmacy, I remember that behind every medicine is a family that needs it to be happy, and that our responsibility is to make sure those families get exactly what they need to heal." When Emily finished her speech, the entire audience stood to applaud. Michael and Margaret were crying with pride. "I think we did a good job," Margaret whispered to Michael. "I think you taught her very well," Michael replied. "We taught her together," Margaret corrected, "like a real family." That night, after the ceremony, the three went out to dinner to celebrate. It was a tradition they had built over the years. Whenever something important happened in Emily's life, they celebrated together. "Grandma Margaret," Emily said during dinner, "do you ever regret walking into that pharmacy that day?" "Never," Margaret answered without hesitation. "It was the best day of my retirement." "Why?" the girl asked. "Because that's when I discovered I still had so much love to give," Margaret said, "and when I found two people who needed exactly that love." Michael smiled. "For me, it was the best day too," he said, "even though it was one of the scariest." "Why scary?" Emily asked. "Because that's when I realized I almost lost everything that mattered in life," Michael explained. "My honesty, my dignity, and maybe even you." "But you didn't lose them," Emily said. "I didn't because Grandma Margaret taught me it's never too late to do the right thing," Michael replied. "And you both taught me that family doesn't have to share the same blood," Margaret said. "All you need is the same love." The three hugged right there in the restaurant, paying no mind to the curious glances from other customers. They were an unconventional family, formed by the most unlikely circumstances, yet bound by genuine and enduring love. Today, Emily Rose is in medical school, preparing to fulfill her dream of helping other sick children. Michael continues working at the pharmacy, now as a manager. He uses his experience to train other employees about the importance of professional ethics. And Margaret, at 75, remains active in her volunteer work. She founded a small organization that helps underprivileged families access healthcare assistance programs. The organization is called Chosen Family, in honor of her own experience. Every Thursday, the three still meet for dinner. It's a sacred commitment they never break, no matter what's happening in their lives. To Grandma Margaret, who taught us that love can blossom in the most unexpected places, Emily Rose always says when making a toast. To Dad, who taught me it's possible to start over after a mistake, Margaret always replies. And to Emily Rose, who taught us that fighting for what's right is always worth it, Michael always adds. And so every week, they raise a glass to the family they built together, from an encounter that began as an investigation and turned into the greatest gift any of them had ever received. The end. Now, dear listener, what did you think of this story of redemption and family? Do you believe Margaret made the right choice by helping Michael instead of simply arresting him? Share in the comments which part moved you the most. Don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss other touching stories like this one.